here, but we're not going to have time to answer all of them. There is a link that maybe you could share on the chat as well for anybody who wants to learn more. And you can also go to our symposium page. We have links to all of the participants, or sorry, all of the speakers, all of the links you can find there. Okay, so Monica, over to you. Thank you very much, Dr. Vasudevan. Great to hear about all of this.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you all for your patience.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sona Vasudevan. Now, I would like to welcome Dr. Phillip Compeau. He would be talking on undergraduate and high school computational biology education at Carnegie Mellon University. Dr. Phillip is an associate teaching professor and assistant department head in the Computational Biology Department at Carnegie Mellon University. He is a passionate educator who has taught a range of STEM courses to a diverse collection of student groups, an experienced administrator who works to make the student the central focus of our educational programs, and a leader of several successful projects in open online education. Over to you, Dr. Phillip.
Okay, thank you so much for the kind introduction. I'm going to share my screen. And you can find information about our department at cbd.cmu.edu. So we have a nice short URL. And that's going to have information about the programs that I'm talking about today, as well as all of our educational programs. So we're in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the US. We have a PhD program that's joint with University of Pittsburgh, which is actually just down the street from our university. It's kind of rare to have two universities that actually are directly adjacent to each other. We also have two master's programs, one in computational biology and another in automated science. So we have opened a laboratory that is totally robotically driven, where students can learn about how to not just program the robot to perform experiments in biology, but also to train the robot to make decisions about what future experiments to run based off of the results of experiments. So you have this closed loop experimentation system. But what I was going to talk about today is two projects that I have essentially created, one and serve as a director of. One is our undergraduate degree in computational biology, and another is a high school program that I founded with Josh Kangas that educates students over the summer within the field of computational biology, and that program makes us somewhat unique. So I'm very proud of both of these programs. I know that others may talk about more graduate education, but I wanted to share the type of thing that we do with both undergraduate and high school students. If you're interested in our other programs, I would encourage you to go to our website and check them out, because we have wonderful programs for every variety of interest. So in our undergraduate program, we accept students directly to colleges within Carnegie Mellon. So at most American universities, you just apply to the university. And then when you arrive, you decide on what your major is going to be. And everybody can decide on whatever major, and then that means that in many places, computer science has like thousands of people at a time, and so it makes it very difficult to have any sort of personal relationships or this type of thing, because you have just huge classrooms and you're just getting students through. We're a little bit different in that students apply to schools based off of their interest, and so our department is one of 7 departments within the School of Computer Science. The others are things like human-computer interaction, machine learning, and so on. And we have a very, very selective school. So it's one of the most selective institutions in the US. The acceptance rate is only, unfortunately, about 5%. That means that we don't get to see as many talented students as we probably could. We're one of 4 majors that students can choose from once they're accepted, the others being computer science, artificial intelligence, and human-computer interaction. And all the 4 of those majors, students are trained very, very computationally first. So there are plenty of bioinformatics majors out there already. Most of them are aimed towards biologists. And I think what differentiates us is that we are training computational scientists first and foremost. We keep hearing about the computational and big data revolution in biology. And so certainly our students receive a great deal of biological training. We have an entire core of study that's devoted to biological foundational coursework. but we feel that it's just as important to train them as computational scientists alongside some of the smartest undergraduate minds in computer science in the world. And then we have an entire core of computational biology coursework that sits at the intersection of all this math and computer science and biology and physics and chem that students take. And what's nice about this is that those core CS math requirements are the same that computer science majors get. So we know that our students are being put through a very, very rigorous kind of world famous training process at the undergraduate level. One of the cool things that this means that we can do is our students come in and they take a mathematics course that's usually, even by math majors, only taken as juniors or seniors, where they prove theorems and learn about discrete mathematics. Our students do that in their first semester. We know they come in as very, very talented programmers, or if they're not, they become very talented programmers quickly. And so in our second semester, we teach students an entire course devoted to what we call great ideas in Compeau. So that's our first cohort that we had. And if you search for that, I should be easy to find. I've got an entire website about the course. It contains slides and descriptions of some of our student projects that they did, as well as kind of the philosophy of the course and how we've set it up. We have a collection of course aims. I like talking about this course just a little bit because I founded it with Carl Kingsford and I've taught it for 3 years, where the central aim is to show students what has made biology a computational discipline. It's inherently a data-driven computational discipline in 2021. And so we tell the story, so to speak, of what has happened to make that the case. So throughout this, we find that there's these sub-aims of, for example, you have fundamental algorithmic topics like dynamic programming, and it comes up several times throughout the course. We take this big, broad view of computational biology to find really cool ideas outside of standard topics. I'll mention that briefly here in a second. We profile topics that have actually been so important that they've gone off and informed things that are outside of biology and computer science. Things like how BLAST works, really, for database search, or things like neural networks. We also point students towards primary research, so at any moment of the course, I always show students the actual research papers that this came from, whether it comes from 1970 or whether it comes from just a few years ago. Our students do group projects, and we also plug in world-leading researchers to give guest lectures to our students as well, so they can see that this is very much a living and breathing discipline. When we teach these first-year students, the first half of the course is devoted to these classic topics in genomics, things like de Bruijn graphs for genome assembly, things like global and local sequence alignment, Smith-Waterman algorithm, read mapping. So we explain how the Burrows-Wheeler transform works and how that's applied to read mapping. Again, this is the sort of thing that you would typically see in maybe a PhD level class or maybe a final semester undergrad course, but we're able to teach it to first-year undergraduates. And then in the second half of the course, we take this big, broader view of what computational biology is. And we cover things within systems biology. We talk about the foundations of neural networks, as well as, explore how this has affected this really neat algorithm called the Elan-Kashtan algorithm in systems biology. We also talk about algorithms in nature. We talk about spatial and evolutionary game theory, Turing patterns, things that you might not typically see in a one semester overview course, pretty much because they're beautiful ideas that have led to a lot of other cool work, even if they aren't, at the forefront of what is going on in computational biology today. One of the other cool things about our undergrad degree is that we guarantee at least one semester of research to all of our majors. That goes back to our point about going to a university and finding yourself one of 1,000 other majors in a certain subject, and it being a battle to be able to have any sort of research experience. We only have about 20 majors per year. And so that means that we can pair our faculty with all students who want to do research. And we do this because it's what our students told us they wanted. So when we met with prospective students, they kept saying over and over again, I really want to come here so I can do research. What can you do? And so we work with our faculty to guarantee that. We also connect our students downstream to opportunities outside of their degree. We know that our degree is very expensive to the point that was just raised, and we want to do everything that we can to help students of all of our programs get connected to opportunities in industry, often hearing from what our alums are doing. So this is at one of our events, and we hold these virtually as well. We send resume books of students to alums and contacts in industry and so on. And we also try to have fun with our students too. So even when it's cold in Pittsburgh in the wintertime, we find something to do with them going snow tubing. So that's a kind of a big picture about what we do with our undergrad degree. And our undergraduate degree has only recently graduated its first students who had transferred in from other majors. Our first main cohort, because we've started 4 years ago, our first main cohort is going to be graduating this spring. So it'll be exciting to see all the sorts of things that they head off to do. Although we know they're interested in medical careers, whether or not that means within medical school or not, or going off to industry, whether that's biotech, pharma, or a traditional tech firm. So that's one of the programs that I wanted to discuss. And the other is our high school program in computational biology. That's one of a suite of programs that is offered by Carnegie Mellon. So I think there are 11 high school programs that we have over the summer that are all taught by professors, and that allow students to come to campus under normal circumstances and have kind of a student experience on campus. Our program runs for 3 weeks. Some of the programs run for 6 weeks, where students are in the classroom full-time throughout the day, or working on something, for 8 hours a day for every weekday. And so we have this very intensive, full-time program for a short period of time with rising seniors in high school. So 16, 17-year-old students. We told students, when we started, just as we communicate our goals for my first year undergrad course, we communicate our goals very, very upfront for our high school program too. So we tell students the first and foremost thing that we want to do is have fun. What's wonderful about this, and I'll tie this to point number 5, is that we don't assign grades. There's no metric of success in our program other than just learning. There's no deliverables. Students complete a short project, but in terms of the core content that they're learning, the goal of the program is solely to learn and to have fun doing so. So that means we can really challenge students too, because there are no stakes. We don't have students climbing over each other to try and get a higher grade so they can move on and get into the next school. It's not something that we have to worry about, frankly. As part of this, students usually will learn a new programming language. So we currently use Go. We may change that in the future, but we use a language that's kind of outside of what students typically do, so that students don't come in and say, well, I already know how to program in Python, because this way students will learn something new regardless. We want them to appreciate that computation is everywhere in biology, that biology is very much a computational discipline in 2021. And we want students to write their own code. So kind of the full cycle of how our program works is that we present students with some biological problem. We explain to them how we're going to solve it computationally. We then show how you might do this by breaking it up into smaller pieces, but the students solve all of those pieces and then put them back together into a very large piece of code that they can then apply to some real biological data set. Those real biological data sets are taken from either the microbiome of the 3 rivers in Pittsburgh. So we have 2 rivers that flow together into a third, and the 2 rivers are very different from each other. They flow through different sorts of environments. One goes by a lot of steel mills, the other is much more rural. And so we captured on a boat, we went out and got water samples with our students from different seasons, and we got a lot of data sets, metagenomics data sets. But we also used the opportunity of the pandemic to look at publicly available genome data sets for SARS-CoV-2 as well. So, but our main topic of focus is in microbiology. And we communicate to students how our classroom works. So just as we communicate upfront our goals, we tell students why we've set up the program in the way that we have. So we talk to them about active learning and about how, if we can get our students to do as much in the classroom as possible, as opposed to just listening to me drone on, and receiving information, that regardless of their background, they will see a marked increase in what their outcome is, so in their ability. And that often this doesn't feel like the experience of learning, and other studies have shown that even though students are objectively learning more via active learning, they feel like they're learning less. And we tell students that that feeling of internal struggle is what learning feels like. We use this sort of research, educational research, to inform a transition to our online classroom. So over the past 2 years, we've had to run this program remotely to students across the country. And we use best practices for this. One of the things that we do, partly based off of student input, is we now have students solve problems in teams of 4 or 5. So at most points of the program, students are working together to solve some coding challenge. And they're in small groups doing this, and they can code all in one window that's shared through something called Atom. So they can all see the same coding window, and then they can all run the code together. So this creates this really nice kind of group dynamic where students have input from teaching assistants and input from us, the instructors, as we're roaming around, but they're all working together constantly, so that even though they're online, they're able to really do something all the time in the program. So what is it that we cover? Remember, I mentioned our 3 rivers. We ask, how is it that the bacteria that are present in these rivers change over time? How are they different from one river to the other? How is seasonality important to this? And we use this to come up with simple metrics that are the metrics that are used by biologists, but very easy to explain metrics for quantifying the diversity of a single bacterial sample or comparing 2 bacterial samples, and sprinkle a little machine learning magic on this to produce a plot like this one that shows that seasonality is more important than location for determining bacterial diversity in the 3 rivers. In the second module of the course, and so I've put all the lines of code that students write or that we have as our official solutions. And it shows, I think it's to show how much code that students will write, because typically when students are solving some coding challenge, we don't continue until all the groups are finished. We were worried about whether or not that would be possible, given that many of our students have never programmed until like 2 months before our program, when we send them some preparatory materials. But then all of our groups pretty much solve every single one of our problems. So when we say total number of lines of code, this is, students are writing this much code and using it to solve biological examples. The next of this module is about, comparing genes, whether it's a database search, and we talk about BLAST. We don't code the entire BLAST algorithm, but we discuss how it works. But what we do code are things like Smith-Waterman sequence alignment, and the students all code it themselves, and then they apply it to something like comparing SARS-CoV to SARS-CoV-2, so they can actually see something that we hear about in the news, which, for example, which is that the variation of SARS-CoV is, isolated to, different points. You have a variable variation throughout the genome. So they can see that based off of the code that they produced. We even write a genome assembler with our students, which is our largest coding project. They're coding as fast as they can go. And we apply it to both simulated and real data to show that on their simulated data that has, some error rate. Our assembler, this is a mummer plot on the left, our assembler does really good job at assembling the SARS-CoV-2 genome. It does an okay job on real data when we cut it loose on real data. And we use this as an opportunity to show that there's pretty much always improvements that we can make, even after we write 1,400 lines of code. If we really wanted a real genome assembler that would truly work on a viral data set, it might need to be 10 times as long as that. And if we were going to apply it to bacteria, it might need to be 100 times as long. But once we can assemble a genome, we can find the genes in it. So we have a short module for students to find genes, and we use this to build a simple annotation of something like a viral genome, as well as to compare our gene finder against an annotation for a larger organism. And students, even with a simple approach, are able to reconstruct like 80% of the genes in, say, a sequenced annotated bacterium. And then in the final module of our class, we produce evolutionary trees, and we apply this to a variety of different contexts. So we look at, for example, coronavirus genomes taken from patients in different countries to understand the initial spread of the coronavirus around the world. We also have students implement a simple version of Clustal, so that this is the actual alignment that came from students' code, so that they can start looking through this, throughout the course of the pandemic, and not just identifying the variants, but defining the variants themselves. And then we compare the student definition against, say, the CDC's definition of what is it that makes an alpha variant, what is it that makes a delta variant. And then we can allow students to classify each of our genomes in some database, say the UK patient genome database, to classify each patient genome according to which variant it applies to. And this is, we just do, normal alpha and delta, but even with this simple classifier that we build, we can see the percentages of the alpha variant go up, very highly in early 2021, and then it's completely replaced with the delta variant. So students, again, have this feeling that they're really doing the research themselves. There's nothing that the real biological researchers did that they couldn't have done themselves now that they have this knowledge. Finally, I point out, we have very, very strong teaching evaluations for our program, but there have been some qualitative feedback that I love to profile here because it reinforces our original goals. Most students, when they learn to program, they learn about it in the context of math. When they think about computer science, they're thinking about Google or Facebook or Amazon. And it's unfortunate that even though this computational revolution has happened, our students, even very, very strong students, many of whom come from very privileged high school backgrounds, have no idea that programming can be used to solve very important problems in biology. And that, many of these problems are very new. For example, with respect to the pandemic, they love the collaboration that we have. They really appreciate the challenge. One student has called it grueling this year, but then said something very positive. So if we're able to balance extreme challenge without frustrating or stressing out our students, then we really know that we're doing our job. And then I always give my favorite quote is from Nia, who was interviewed by a blog to discuss her experience, not just in our program, but with the pre-college program at CMU as a whole. And it was wonderful to see that something that we don't tell our students is that we pair them up based off of their backgrounds, based off of their geography, making sure that all of our groups are kind of ethnically and gender diverse. And we didn't tell our students this, but she recognized, hey, I know that they created our groups to be as diverse as possible, often with different backgrounds, strong biologists or strong computational students. And that's what made the teams work so well. So she was a wonderful student, I should say, but I always try to end with her quote. I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't know where we are on time, but thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for this presentation. We are just very short on time, in fact, 1 minute over time, but it was great to hear about this program. We do have just maybe a couple of questions that we can fit in. The first one is, do you accept high school students from different states, for example, the state of Louisiana? And if yes, do you have a summer program that is online or face-to-face? And if you have a link for that?
Yeah, so we accept students from around the world when we're in person, and we're hoping to be in person next summer. So you can find, if you go to our department website, or there's a pre-college Carnegie Mellon. If you just Google pre-college Carnegie Mellon, you'll find all of the programs. So it may be that you find yourself interested in something else, and those are easy to find.
All right, thank you very much. And it was great to hear the presentation. We're hoping to learn more from the links that you provided. Thank you.